This is Scott Spratt from Pro Football Focus, and this is another Fantasy Slant. Since Brandon Marshall arrived in Chicago, he has been one of the most consistent and productive receivers in the sport. He's had at least 100 receptions each of the last 2 seasons, at least 11 touchdowns each of the last 2 seasons, and at least 1,200 receiving yards each of the last 3 seasons, a distinction that only Calvin Johnson shares with Marshall. Marshall is 30 years old now, but at 6'4", 229 pounds, don't expect his trend of fantasy success to stop anytime soon. He's got the size and physicality to push around a lot of smaller defensive backs, and can continue to do so for several more seasons. However, Marshall is no longer the only show in Chicago, as sophomore receiver Alshon Jeffery broke out in a big way last season with 89 catches, 1,421 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Jeffery is another big receiver at 6'4", 230 pounds, and he has the pedigree as a second-round pick in 2012. That said, it's still pretty unusual for 2 receivers on the same team to enter the top 10 in fantasy, which Marshall and Jeffery were able to accomplish last season. Some owners are going to be skeptical of drafting Jeffery in the top 10 this season, in part because much of his success happened with Josh McCown under center, and McCown is now quarterbacking down in Tampa Bay. However, don't expect Jeffery to slow down at all. In the 10 games that he played with Jay Cutler, he was also a top 10 receiver. In those games, Jeffery had 52 catches, 798 yards, and 3 touchdowns, pretty similar to Marshall's 63, 809, and 10 line. And Jeffery had 84 targets from Cutler, which is only 14 fewer than the 98 Marshall had. I think the trend that people saw with Jeffery and McCown was actually a trend of Jeffery just breaking out and getting better over the course of the season. You can see that in Jeffery's first and second half splits. In the first 8 games of the season, Jeffery had just 38 catches, 621 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then over the final half, it jumped to 51 catches, 800 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I think that trend will continue with Cutler under center, and Jeffery will once again be a top 10 receiver this year. The only real reason why these 2 may not rejoin the top 10 is that Marcus Wilson, a 7th-round pick in 2013, is receiving rave reviews in camp this season. Wilson will look to win the 3rd wide receiver position on the team, and at 6'3", he could provide another massive option for the team. However, he was just a 7th-round pick last year, so maybe it's not worth buying too much into the hype here. He doesn't have the same pedigree as either Jeffery or Marshall. And because of that, I'm willing to draft both Marshall and Jeffery in the top 10 in fantasy in redraft leagues. And Jeffery has to be considered among the top 10 in dynasty leagues as well. This is Scott Spratt from Pro Football Focus, signing off.